Jenny and I had been married for 2 years, living in the hilltop villa under my name. From the location scouting to the security system, every detail of this house had been decided by me personally. The access control system had 3 levels. Housekeepers could only enter on Wednesdays from 9 to 11 in the morning. The gardener was only allowed in the yard. Even the driver had no authorization beyond the foyer. Jenny had always known that. She even used to laugh at me about it. Erick Tang. This isn't cleanliness obsession. This is territorial instinct. I admitted it. I didn't like people touching my things, and I liked outsiders standing inside my house even less. So when I came back early from my business trip, pushed open the door, and saw an extra pair of men's leather shoes in the foyer, I froze for 3 seconds. In the open kitchen, a young man was wearing my house slippers, holding my coffee mug, and turning around with a smile at me. CEO Tang's back. His tone was so natural, as if he were half the owner of this house. CEO Mu is upstairs changing clothes. Please, have a seat first. I looked at the slippers on his feet, then at the mug in his hand. At that moment, I didn't lose my temper. I simply raised my head and looked toward Jenny Mu, who was slowly walking out from the second floor, who gave him access authorization. Chapter 1. I arrived home 6 hours earlier than planned. The driver placed my luggage at the entrance and asked whether I needed help bringing it inside. I waved him off. The wind at the hilltop was strong, making the pine trees outside the villa rustle loudly. The security system recognized me, and the heavy bronze doors opened inward. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed an extra pair of men's shoes on the left side of the foyer. Black handmade leather shoes, polished to a shine, size 42, not mine. The foyer in my house was always spotless. The shoe cabinet was strictly organized. Guest slippers were stored on the bottom shelf and disinfected after every use. No one casually left outdoor shoes on the floor. Jenny knew my rules. I stood at the doorway without moving. The next second, a soft clink of a cup landing on the counter came from the open kitchen. A man leaned out, about 26 or 27 years old, white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a perfectly measured look of surprise on his face. On his feet were my gray house slippers. Those slippers were custom made. There was only one pair in the house. Even Jenny never wore them. The man froze for half a second before quickly smiling again. CEO Tang's back. I didn't answer. His gaze dropped to my suitcase before he added, "Weren't you supposed to arrive tomorrow?" Interesting question. As if he was supposed to know my schedule, or as if he thought I had come back too early and interrupted him. Holding the coffee mug, he walked out casually, completely at ease. CEO Mu is upstairs changing clothes. Please, have a seat first. I glanced at the mug in his hand. Black glaze with gold trim, the one I usually used. I wasn't exactly an easy person to get along with, but there was one thing about me that was fair. I didn't sentence people in the very first second. I gave them a chance to explain. So I pushed my suitcase aside and lowered my head to undo my cufflinks. Seeing that I remained silent, the smile on the man's face faded slightly, but he still didn't back down. He even stepped aside half a pace, like a host greeting a guest. CEO Tang, the coffee was just brewed. Would you like me to pour you a cup too? I finally smiled. What's your name? Julian, he answered immediately. An architectural designer on Jen's team. Jen. The nickname rolled off his tongue far too naturally. I raised my eyes toward the second floor. Jenny happened to be coming downstairs, her hair still half wet, wearing a casual home dress. The moment she saw me, she visibly froze. How come you came back early? Not you're back, but how come you came back early? I nodded. Very good. I raised my hand and pointed at Julian's feet, my slippers. Who allowed him to wear them? Jenny frowned. Before she could speak, Julian hurriedly answered first. Please don't misunderstand. I accidentally got my shoes wet earlier, and CEO Mu was worried I'd catch a cold. So she let me borrow them for a bit. His voice lowered, carrying a trace of awkwardness. If it bothers you, I'll take them off right now. As he spoke, he bent down slowly, looking aggrieved and restrained, but his eyes drifted toward Jenny. Sure enough, Jenny spoke up. Eric, it's just a pair of slippers. I didn't look at her. I only stared at Julian. Who gave you the access authorization? Chapter 2. The living room fell silent for 2 seconds. Julian stopped bending down, his fingers resting on the edge of the slippers as if my single sentence had frightened him. Jenny walked down the stairs, her tone still relatively calm. I gave it to him. I looked at her. She walked to Julian's side and instinctively shielded him by half a step. She probably didn't even realize she had done it herself. He needed to compare the project blueprints on site. He's been working on the greenhouse design on the east side of the villa recently, so I temporarily gave him access to make measuring easier. I smiled faintly. Temporary? Yes. Jenny looked at me. It's just work. Julian immediately joined in. CEO Tang, Please don't misunderstand. CEO Mu thought it would be too troublesome to keep notifying property management. So she gave me access authorization. I only came today to revise the blueprints. I didn't expect you to come back early. He paused, then added another sentence. If this has caused you discomfort, I can stop coming in the future. Beautifully said. Taking a step back made him seem considerate. Then tossing the problem onto me made me look petty and controlling. I took out my phone and opened the villa's security back-end system. Jenny's expression changed slightly. I scanned the authorization records. Julian. Visitor authorization. Valid for 7 days. Unlimited entry and exit hours. Accessible areas. Main residence. Garden. Underground garage. Private theater. I raised my eyes toward Jenny. You call this temporary? Jenny fell silent for a moment. The system defaults to 7 days. I didn't notice. You didn't notice? I turned my phone toward her, the screen facing her directly. Main residence. Garage. Private theater. Jenny, you even gave him access to the hallway outside my study. Her brows tightened further. I didn't unlock the study itself, but he can walk right up to the study door. So what? Her voice finally turned cold. The study has a separate lock. He can't get inside. Julian immediately lowered his voice. CEO Mu. Forget it. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have come so frequently, and I definitely shouldn't have made CEO Tang misunderstand. After speaking, he looked at me, his eyes faintly reddening. CEO Tang, I'm just a designer. CEO Mu trusts my professional skills, which is why she allowed me to participate in this project. I know you're someone of high status and value your privacy, but I truly have no inappropriate intentions. Leaning against the foyer cabinet, I slowly nodded. Whether you have inappropriate intentions or not isn't important. Julian froze. I looked at Jenny. Did he stay here last night? Julian's face instantly turned pale. Jenny also paused for 2 seconds. I was away on a business trip, and you let another man stay overnight in this house. Back then, this was the place where she held me and said, when we grow old, this place will belong to only the two of us. She said this was a home, not a hotel, and no man would ever stay overnight here. Yet the first person to cross the boundary was her. Jenny's expression finally darkened completely. Erick Tang. Do you really have to make it sound so disgusting? It was late, so he just stayed one night in the guest room. Disgusting. I laughed. A stranger wearing my slippers, holding my mug, standing inside my house asking me whether I want coffee. The fact that I didn't have security drag him out already counts as me giving you respect. Jenny's face went completely cold. Erick, can you stop blowing every little thing out of proportion? Julian is my designer, not some stranger. He comes to this house for work, not to challenge your authority. I actually laughed at that. When did my house become your studio? Jenny paused. Standing beside her, Julian lowered his head and spoke softly. CEO Tang, please don't blame CEO Mu. She's been under a lot of pressure lately, and the Hilltop project deadline is tight. I only wanted to help share some of her burden. He painted himself as the understanding subordinate, painted Jenny as the hard-working boss, and painted me as the husband who didn't understand his wife. Chapter 3. Jenny immediately glanced at him, and her expression softened slightly. When she looked back at me, her tone already carried the air of someone giving a lecture. Erick, marriage isn't only about your rules. We're husband and wife. You should also learn to tolerate my way of working sometimes. I lifted my head and looked at her. Tolerate? Yes, she said. You can't stay this domineering forever. Julian is just a young designer. He doesn't mean any harm. The way you keep pressuring him is making things very uncomfortable. Julian immediately lowered his voice. CEO Mu. It's okay. I don't mind. He said he didn't mind, yet his eyes were perfectly red at the right moment. Watching the two of them play good cop and victim together, I suddenly found the whole thing meaningless. I lowered my head and tapped a few times on my phone. Beep. A short notification sound echoed through the villa's security system. Julian's visitor authorization was revoked. Jenny frowned. Erick, I didn't stop. I continued operating the system. Housekeepers, gardener, driver, property management, maintenance team, every authorization was wiped. Finally, even Jenny's authorization was temporarily frozen. The system notifications rang one after another, cold and emotionless. Jenny's expression changed completely. You suspended my access too. I put my phone away. Yes, this is our home. Let me correct you. I looked at her. This is a house under my name. Her breathing stalled for a second. I pressed the master control panel on the wall, and the villa entered full security reset mode. Every door lock automatically sealed. The elevator shut down. The garage doors closed. I walked to the access panel and re-entered fingerprint authorizations. Mine first, then the backup security team. No Jenny Mu. She stood in the middle of the living room as if realizing for the first time who this house truly obeyed. Julian's face had already turned pale, but he still forced himself to speak. CEO Tang, don't you think this is hurting CEO Mu too much? I turned to look at him. Why are you still standing here? He froze. I looked toward the door. Take off the slippers and get out. Chapter 4. In the end, Julian left wearing only his socks. I threw the slippers he had worn into the trash can beside the foyer. Jenny stood nearby, her expression ugly. Erick, you went too far today. I ignored her and walked into the kitchen. The coffee machine was still on, and the black glazed mug with gold trim sat on the counter. There was a faint coffee stain on the rim. Julian had used it. I picked it up, looked at it for 2 seconds, then let go. The mug crashed into the sink and shattered cleanly. Jenny finally snapped. Was that really necessary? Yes, it's just a mug. I wiped my hands. To you, it's just a mug. I looked at her. To me, it's my belongings being touched by someone who had no right to touch them. She took a deep breath, clearly suppressing her anger. Can you act a little more mature? Julian didn't do it on purpose. He didn't know it was your mug, and he didn't know the slippers weren't supposed to be worn. I nodded. He didn't know, and you didn't know either. Jenny was caught speechless by the question. I turned and walked toward the study. She immediately followed after me. What are you doing now? I didn't answer. There was a faint patch of mud marks on the carpet outside the study door. Very faint. But before leaving for my business trip yesterday, I had instructed the housekeeper to deep clean the entire villa. The study door itself hadn't been opened, but the doorknob carried a layer of fingerprint oil sheen that wasn't mine. I stood before the door, entered the password, and pushed it open. The documents on the desk had been moved. Not obviously, but I had never relied on vague impressions to remember where things belonged. The initial surveying map for the East Suburb redevelopment project had originally been pressed beneath the third folder. Now it was under the second. I walked over and pulled it out. Jenny followed me inside. The moment she saw the file in my hand, her expression shifted slightly. I raised my eyes. He touched the documents in my study. No, she answered too quickly. I smiled faintly. Then why are you nervous? Jenny frowned. I just think you're acting like you're interrogating a criminal right now. Shouldn't you be interrogated? Her expression completely turned cold. Erick, don't be ridiculous. Julian only helped me look at the greenhouse traffic flow layout. He stood at the doorway and never came inside. I was the one who took the blueprints out to him. I stared at her. You took documents out of my study for him to see. They were materials related to the villa renovation. Her tone hardened. I have the right to handle them. You have the right. I'm your wife. So that means you can hand my private documents to a male designer. Jenny was silent for several seconds before suddenly laughing softly. There was exhaustion in that laugh, but also a faintly superior sense of helplessness. Erick, are you just too used to everyone obeying you? Married couples shouldn't divide things this clearly. I only want you to learn that not everything in a marriage has to follow your rules. Learn again. Looking at her, I finally understood. It wasn't that she didn't know I minded. It was that she believed I needed to be corrected. And Julian wasn't lacking boundaries either. He was simply very skilled at targeting the exact places where Jenny most wanted to prove her authority. He wore my slippers, used my mug, touched my study. None of it was severe on its own, but every single step landed directly on my boundaries. Then he waited for me to lose my temper, and afterward, Jenny would step in to lecture me, tolerate me, tame me. I placed the file back on the desk, my voice calm and flat. Jenny, she looked at me. I said, first time. Chapter 5. I looked at her and slowly straightened my cuffs. The problem isn't Julian. He's young. He wants status, wants to climb higher, wants to use your influence to elevate himself. That's normal. The problem is you. Jenny lifted her chin slightly. I continued. You knew exactly what my boundaries were, yet you still brought him into this house. It wasn't because work required it. It was because you wanted to prove you could ignore my rules. She stared at me, her eyes turning colder little by little. Erick, aren't you taking this way too seriously? A designer coming over to discuss plans somehow sounds like trespassing into forbidden territory when you say it. Marriage isn't a prison, and this house isn't your restricted zone. I lowered my head and laughed softly. Not a restricted zone. Then why don't you take down the nameplate outside and replace it with a studio sign? Jenny frowned. Do you always have to argue like this? I stepped closer and looked down at her. I'm only reminding you not to confuse boundaries with control issues, and not to mistake disrespect for freedom. She didn't back away. Then let me remind you too, we're married. I'm not your guest. After saying that, she turned and left. I stood where I was and didn't stop her. At 11 that night, my assistant forwarded me a screenshot from a social media story. The poster was Julian. The photo showed the night view from my villa's terrace, mountain wind, city lights, and the corner of a wine glass. The caption contained only one sentence. Some people understand design, and understand the night too. I looked at it for 2 seconds and smiled. Very good. The next morning, that screenshot had already spread through the social circles. People had added fuel to the fire with extra captions. CEO Moo brought her young boyfriend to stay at the Hilltop Villa. Rising star in the design industry climbing to the top. So Erick Tang from the Tang family is really getting publicly humiliated now. The wealthy circles, the real estate circles, the design circles, they were all bored people. A tiny rumor was enough to keep them gossiping for 3 days and nights. I didn't rush to make a statement. I wanted to see how Jenny would handle it first. In the end, she did nothing. Not until noon did she finally send me a message. "Don't make this bigger. I'll suppress it," I replied. "How exactly are you planning to suppress it?" Her side went silent for several minutes before a reply finally came. "Julian already deleted the post." I smiled faintly. Deleting it didn't mean the matter was over. The more ambiguous something like this was, the more dangerous it became if left unclarified, because silence was the same as defaulting to acceptance. I dialed the legal director's number. Draft the lawyer's letters. 2 targets, Julian, and the first media account that spread the rumors. The legal director asked, "CEO Tang, defamation or privacy infringement?" "Both." My voice was calm. "Also organize the villa ownership documents and access control records. We'll need them later." After hanging up, I typed 2 words into my memo app. Second time. Chapter 6. 3 days later, I attended the design exhibition in the west side of the city. The exhibition hadn't originally been on my schedule, but my secretary informed me that Jenny's design studio would be presenting a residential showcase project there. So I went. I knew that project very well. The initial positioning, spatial logic, and material direction had originally been planned by Jenny and me together. Back then, she had leaned against me and said this would be the first project jointly signed by us after marriage. I still remembered how she kissed my chin that day and smiled. CEO Tang has such high standards for aesthetics, perfect for helping me keep things in check. But today, on the giant screen in the center of the exhibition hall, the lead designer's name wasn't mine. It was Julian. I stood below the stage and watched him in his perfectly tailored suit, holding a laser pointer while speaking confidently. He talked about the borrowed scenery effect of the greenhouse, talked about the mountain circulation flow, talked about the terrace sight lines. Everything he described so fluently had originally been the core concepts inside the first draft documents from my study. The vice president beside me cursed quietly. "This kid's got guts." I said nothing. Not until the host asked, "Teacher Julian, who would you most like to thank for this project?" Julian smiled, his gaze crossing the audience and landing precisely on Jenny Moo in the distance. "Of course, CEO Moo. CEO Moo understands my talent better than anyone." A wave of meaningful applause rose from the audience. I clapped too. Not loudly, but enough for several people in the front row to turn around. Julian saw me, and the smile on his face stiffened for half a second. I nodded at him, then turned and left. That night, after returning to the company, I instructed my secretary to retrieve every email record related to the joint authorship agreement. Since she enjoyed playing games so much, then I would play with her until the very end. Chapter 7. That weekend was the Moo family dinner gathering. I originally didn't want to go, but Jenny's mother personally called me, saying the family hadn't gathered together in a long time and asking me to do her the favor of attending. Only after arriving did I realize it wasn't just family tonight. Julian was there too. He sat diagonally across from Jenny, wearing a light gray dress shirt, carrying himself with restrained politeness like a junior attending an elite family dinner for the first time. Jenny's mother, however, clearly liked him a lot. "This child has spirit. There's something in his eyes. When I look at him, I see Jenny when she was younger." I set down my chopsticks and lifted my gaze slightly. "Since when are outsiders allowed to attend my family dinners?" The entire table instantly fell silent. Jenny's mother's smile stiffened awkwardly. "Erick, Julian isn't an outsider. He's helped Jenny a great deal recently. Professional collaboration is fine." I interrupted calmly. "But sitting at a family dinner table is inappropriate." Julian's face turned pale immediately, and he stood up at once. "Auntie, I'm sorry. I didn't understand the boundaries. I'll leave right now." He moved to leave the table. Then Jenny suddenly spoke. "Sit down." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was cold. Julian froze. Jenny looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes didn't avoid mine. "Erick, enough. You gave attitude at the design exhibition, sent lawyers letters over a social media post, and now you can't even tolerate someone sitting through one dinner. Julian is just my subordinate, not your enemy." I nodded. "Whether he's my enemy or not doesn't matter. What matters is that because of him, you've already abandoned even the most basic sense of boundaries." Jenny's mother hurriedly tried to smooth things over. "We're all family here. Let's talk calmly." But Jenny could no longer suppress her anger. "Who's family with you? You only care about your rules, your boundaries, your dignity. As long as someone doesn't obey you, then they've crossed the line. They're dirty. They're the problem." I looked at her and suddenly found it funny. So she had been holding this in for a very long time, and today she finally chose to say it out loud. I leaned back into my chair, my tone calm. "Finished?" She stared at me, chest rising and falling. No, Erick, I'm sick of your arrogant, superior attitude. Good. Now those sounded like real words. Chapter 8. After the family dinner ended, the car had barely left the Mu family estate when Jenny Mu told the driver to get out. She took the driver's seat herself and pulled the car over by the roadside. The interior of the car was silent. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the backs of them had gone pale. Erick, we need to talk. I gave a quiet hum. Go ahead. She turned to look at me. Have you ever considered that the problem was never Julian? The problem is you. Your need for control is too extreme. Everything has to follow your standards. How the house is arranged, who can enter, who I work with, who I eat with. You have to control all of it. You don't respect my social freedom at all. After listening, I lowered my head and laughed softly. Freedom? You're not fighting for freedom. I lifted my eyes toward her. You're draining the trust and credit of this marriage. The first time, you brought someone into the house, let him touch my belongings, handle my documents. The second time, you allowed that ambiguous social media post to spread without clarification or distancing yourself. The third time, you handed over a jointly credited project to him as lead designer and even brought him to the family dinner. Jenny, marriage is not a power game for you to practice on. She let out a cold laugh and immediately flipped the blame back onto me. In your eyes, everything I do is wrong, because you've never allowed me to have opinions of my own. I looked at her for several seconds, then pulled a document from the file bag and placed it onto her lap. She lowered her head. The moment she saw those words, her expression changed instantly. Divorce agreement. She jerked her head up at me. You're serious? Did you think I was flirting with you? Leaning back against the seat, my tone was gentle to the point of cruelty. Jenny, I gave you chances. Now sign it. She gripped the agreement tightly and stayed silent for a long time. Outside the window, the night pressed down heavily. Finally, she violently threw the agreement back into my arms. I'm not signing. Chapter 9. Not only did she refuse to sign, starting the very next day, she became even more high-profile. Jenny personally took Julian to inspect land sites, properties, and meet with material suppliers. One premium plot in the South District had originally only been scheduled for an internal inspection, but financial media happened to photograph them there. In the photo, Julian was bent slightly over while pointing at blueprints for her, and Jenny tilted her head as she listened. They weren't standing particularly close, but ambiguity never depends on distance. It depends on angles. The headlines became even bolder. CEO Mu's new favorite designer may lead Hilltop series showcase upgrade project. Female capital powerhouse appears alongside genius young designer. When my secretary placed the reports on my desk, she didn't even dare raise her head. After reading them, I smiled. She's trying to force me to bow my head. The vice president asked quietly, should we suppress the media releases first? Suppress what? I closed the file. If she's not ashamed of herself, why should I cover for her? I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. Notify legal, audit, PR, and administration. Meeting this afternoon. The vice president paused. What kind of meeting? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window. My tone calm. Handle it according to procedure. Chapter 10. 3 o'clock that afternoon. Internal special briefing meeting. The attendees weren't only senior executives. The core heads of branding, real estate, risk control, legal, and administration were also present. Jenny was notified to attend as well. When she pushed open the conference room door, her expression was already terrible. Julian followed behind her but was stopped outside by administration staff. Sorry, Mr. Julian. Internal meeting. You do not have authorization to enter. He stood awkwardly at the doorway. Jenny turned back, about to speak, but I had already closed the file in my hands. Of course he doesn't have authorization. She looked at me. Erick, what exactly are you trying to do? Correct one thing. I gestured for the secretary to project the screen. The large display lit up. The first page showed the villa access control backend. Entry records, Julian. The timestamps were densely packed. The first time, when she granted him 7-day access. The second time, the night before I left for my business trip. The third time, Sunday night at 10:14 p.m. The fourth time, 1:07 a.m. The fifth time. Jenny's face turned paler inch by inch. The conference room was silent enough to suffocate. My tone remained calm, as if I were simply reading an ordinary business report. As everyone can clearly see, this Mr. Julian has entered and exited the marital residence under my name numerous times late at night within the past month. I'll save everyone one layer of speculation in advance. I have not caught them in an actual physical affair, but boundaries are not something that only count after clothes come off. Nobody dared speak. I opened the second page. Surveillance screenshots. Julian entering late at night carrying a laptop bag, leaving through the side entrance before dawn. In one photo, he was even holding a wine glass from my terrace while taking pictures. I smiled faintly. I dislike people touching my belongings. And I dislike people even more when they use my house to build a personal image for themselves. Suddenly, commotion erupted outside the door. Julian rushed into the room, his eyes red. CEO Tang, don't you think what you're doing is too excessive? I was only there for work. What right do you have to destroy me like this? I looked at him and nodded slightly. You're crying? Then go cry louder outside. Better yet, cry for the media. He glared at me fiercely, as if he had truly been cornered. I knew he would do it. People like him were the best at using public opinion as a weapon. Sure enough, by 8 that evening, new media articles were already released. Wealthy power figure suspected of suppressing young designer, has visiting a nice house become a crime for ordinary people. Facing the cameras, Julian said with reddened eyes, just because I come from an ordinary background doesn't mean I'm inferior. Leaning back in my office chair, I watched the live stream until the end and laughed out loud. Very good. Finally, it was time for me to release the second set of evidence. Chapter 11. Julian's live stream worked quite well. He wore a faded white shirt and sat inside a rented apartment. Several design books and an old desk lamp were placed on the table beside him. The camera setup had clearly been carefully planned. Poor, clean, stubborn. The bullet comments predictably loved that kind of image. Capitalists bullying workers again. So what if he entered a villa once? Is that really such a huge deal? The control issues rich men have are terrifying. The PR department gave me real-time updates on public opinion. After listening, I said only one sentence. Wait until he finishes crying. Half an hour later, I instructed my assistant to release the second batch of materials. Not secretly filmed footage, accounting records, detailed financial transactions from Jenny's studio over the past 5 months. The rent for the studio under Julian's name had been paid through Jenny's brand consultant fees. The high-end rendering equipment he used had been billed under showroom pre-procurement budget. The custom designer suits, watches, and limited edition glasses he wore to public events over the past few months had all been reimbursed under the category of brand image maintenance. Even the Nordic designer chair behind him in the live stream had been purchased with Jenny's signed approval. Looking at the records displayed on the large screen, I smiled faintly. Poor. What kind of poor person uses a chair worth $280,000? The PR department immediately followed up by releasing the key payment documents, invoice headers, and approval signatures together. Public opinion began shifting instantly. People in the live stream bullet comments started asking Julian, weren't you supposed to be some struggling artist from a humble background? Who's been paying your rent? His expression visibly changed, yet he still stubbornly insisted. CEO Mu simply appreciates my talent and wants to support young designers. I lowered my head to straighten my cuffs and spoke calmly. Appreciates your talent? A married female boss uses company money to pay your rent, buy your equipment, build your image, and even furnish the background for your tearful pity party livestream. And you call that appreciation? I lifted my eyes toward Julian on the screen. If you're going to live off a married boss and use another man's marital home to package your public image, then stop pretending to be some innocent struggling artist. You want to be a kept man and still act morally superior. There's no deal that cheap. The moment those words came out, the livestream bullet comments completely exploded. Holy hell. So he really is being kept by a rich woman, a married female boss. That changes things. Using another couple's marital home for aesthetic photos and then acting pitiful afterward. Shameless. This isn't some oppressed worker. This is a premium level kept man. Julian's face shifted between red and pale. He still tried to explain. It's not what you think. CEO Mu and I are completely innocent. I directly instructed the PR department to release the third set of materials. The presentation draft he had used at the design exhibition, and the original version stored on my study computer from half a month earlier. He had barely even changed the punctuation. The PR director asked me over the phone, CEO Tang, are we releasing this too? Release it. My tone stayed calm. Didn't he claim to have talent? Then let everyone see whether his talent is original or copied. 10 minutes later, the design industry exploded first. Several major industry influencers immediately joined the discussion. These two versions are way too similar. This isn't inspiration, it's plagiarism. The timeline doesn't match either. The original proposal clearly came first. If this is true, then this isn't just about boundaries anymore. This is a professional ethics issue. Julian finally broke down. The live stream ended abruptly. Before the screen went black, all I saw was him clutching his phone with panic written all over his face. Very good. Chapter 12. The next morning, Jenny stormed directly into my office. She didn't even knock. My secretary followed behind her, looking troubled. CEO Tang, CEO Mushi, you can leave, I said calmly. The secretary immediately retreated. After the office door closed, Jenny slammed a stack of documents heavily onto my desk. Withdraw it. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. Withdraw what? The materials you released. She stared at me, her eyes bloodshot. Erick Tang, Come at me if you want, but don't destroy him. I laughed. Come at you. Jenny, the payments were signed by you. The access permissions were granted by you. The project was handed over by you. And the public image was built by himself. Now that everything has collapsed, who exactly do you expect me to go after? Her breathing tightened. He's still young. He can't handle this. And what about me? I raised my eyes toward her. When you dragged me into public opinion, why didn't you think about whether I could handle it? She froze. I continued. Ambiguous photos on social media. My name removed from the joint credit at the design exhibition. The media catching you two scouting locations together. Which one of these wasn't using my dignity to pave the way for your relationship? Jenny stayed silent for several seconds before suddenly laughing softly. The laugh sounded exhausted. You want the truth, don't you? What do you think? I admit it. I did it on purpose. She looked at me and spoke word by word. I deliberately let Julian get closer to me. I deliberately refused to clarify things. I deliberately made you uncomfortable. Because I was sick of you. You're always so superior. Always controlling everything. How projects should be done. How the house should be managed. How marriage should work. Everything has to follow your standards. I just wanted to make you lose control once. I wanted to force you to lower your head. I wanted you to understand that not everything is decided by you. After listening, I nodded slowly. So that was it. Not confusion. Consciously making stupid choices. I stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. You wanted to dominate me. Fine. But I can choose not to keep you. Her eyelashes trembled violently. I stood very close to her, close enough to smell the cold fragrance on her body, and close enough to see the flicker of panic finally appearing in her eyes. Jenny, the stupidest thing you did wasn't letting Julian get close to you. It was believing that after stepping all over my boundaries like this, I would still keep playing the role of a loving husband. Her lips moved slightly, her voice hoarse. You're really willing to go this far over something like this? I let go of her and calmly pulled out a wet wipe to clean my knuckles. This isn't because I want to. You brought yourself to this point. Chapter 13. After that day, I stopped giving her any buffer at all. First, I cut off the projects, then the resources, finally, the finances. I instructed legal to sort through every marital-related collaborative project. All joint collaborations between her brand studio and the real estate divisions under my holdings were suspended. The portion of personal investment I had placed into her brand was withdrawn according to contractual procedures. The 2 showroom pilot projects originally prepared for her studio were also fully reclaimed. The vice president looked at the list and cautiously asked, CEO Tang, are we cutting everything? Everything. Isn't that a little too ruthless? I lifted my eyes toward him. I'm getting divorced, not running a charity. The moment the news spread, the entire social circle understood that the direction of the wind had changed. The first thing to collapse on Jenny's side was her business partnerships. The material brands that had attached themselves to her because of Tang Family Resources immediately began hesitating. Several co-branded real estate projects that had already reached final negotiation stages were suddenly put on hold. The design industry was the most realistic of all. Fame mattered, but the resources behind the fame mattered even more. Julian's situation became even worse. He had originally secured several luxury private residence consultation projects by marketing himself as a genius rising designer. But now the secretly recorded footage, financial records, and plagiarism accusations were all crushing down on him. Clients weren't stupid. Who would spend premium money hiring someone who lived off a married female boss and was suspected of stealing project proposals? Within only 3 days, he lost 4 contracts. By the 5th day, he had already terminated the lease on his studio. When I learned about all this, I was in the middle of a cross-department meeting. My assistant placed the summary report beside me and lowered his voice. CEO Mu's side is under severe financial pressure. I gave a quiet hum without even lifting my eyelids. After the meeting ended, Jenny's mother came to see me. It was the first time she had ever come to my company voluntarily. She no longer looked like the elegant wealthy matriarch from the family dinners. Sitting in my office, her tone was unusually subdued. Erick, Jenny knows she was wrong. She was just confused for a moment and wanted to fight for a bit of pride. She never expected things to escalate like this. I gently pushed the teacup toward her. Auntie, making one confused mistake is called an accident. Making the same choice repeatedly is called a decision. Her expression turned awkward. You were husband and wife for 2 years. Surely there's still some affection left between you. I smiled faintly. That's why I gave her chances first. She chose not to take them. Jenny's mother stayed silent for a long while before finally asking, so there's truly no room left at all? I looked at her, my tone calm. Your daughter wanted control. I gave it to her. The price was the marriage ending. Chapter 14. After Jenny's mother left, Jenny came to the hilltop villa that very night. She no longer had access authorization. Security informed me she was outside. I stood on the second-floor terrace and looked down. She wore a black trench coat, her hair blown wildly by the wind as she stood outside the gate. I ordered the outer gate opened, but not the main door. She walked into the courtyard herself, stopping beneath the stairs before looking up at me. "Do you really have to do this?" I looked down at her, my tone calm. "Which part are you referring to?" "Withdrawing resources, withdrawing investments, making every business partner aware that you want to cut ties with me completely." Her voice tightened. "Erick, you're pushing me to death." I laughed softly. "I'm simply taking back what originally belonged to me." "What? You got used to standing in my shade, and now that the sun's directly on you, you suddenly feel wronged?" She bit her lip, her eyes slightly red. "So all that's left between us now is dividing interests?" I looked at her and faintly curled my lips. "What else did you expect? You wanted me to hug you, comfort you, tell you it's okay and that we could start over. Jenny, have you forgotten? You were the first person to turn marriage into a power game." She stood there silently for a long time. The night wind was fierce. Even her voice seemed scattered by it. "I just didn't want to spend my whole life beneath you. I didn't want to forever be the person defined and arranged by you." I stayed silent for 2 seconds. Then I turned and walked downstairs. When the main door opened, she visibly froze. I walked directly toward her. For a brief instant, a light appeared in her eyes. She probably thought I had softened. Instead, I merely handed her a document. Supplementary divorce agreement. One new clause. Reconfirmation of intellectual property ownership for the jointly branded projects. Every part of your studio's work that used my original proposals will be fully separated out. The faint light in her eyes extinguished instantly. "Do you really have to be this ruthless?" I lowered my gaze to her. "Jenny, from beginning to end, I've only done one thing. Cut my losses." She stared at me as tears finally fell. I had seen her cry before. Cry in bed while saying she couldn't take any more. Tears kissed dry by me as she begged me not to stop. When I pinned her against the floor-to-ceiling windows and kissed her until she could barely breathe, she would also grab my tie with reddened eyes and curse me for being a bastard. Back then, her tears were warm, filled with emotion, filled with closeness, not like now. Now she stood outside my door, crying like a stranger. I didn't wipe her tears away. I didn't reach out to touch her. I only looked at her and spoke word by word. "Sign it, and let this end." Chapter 15. The divorce procedures moved quickly. After stubbornly holding out for so long, she strangely stopped making trouble toward the end. Perhaps she had finally understood. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was serious. The day we left the civil affairs office, the sky was overcast. She stood on the steps holding the divorce certificate, staring at it for a very long time. I didn't wait for her. Just as the driver opened the car door for me, she suddenly called out my name. "Erick." I turned back. She looked at me, her eyes unbearably empty. "Did you ever feel even the slightest bit reluctant?" I thought about it. Yes. Something finally shifted in her eyes, but I continued. What I couldn't let go of was the Jenny who once understood boundaries and protected me as I protected her, not the person you are now. Her face turned pale, and in the end, she said nothing more. The car door closed. I never looked back. 1 week later, I ordered the entire security system of the Hilltop Villa replaced. Door locks, surveillance systems, fingerprints, retina scans, backup authorizations, everything. All old data wiped clean. Even the sensor carpet in the foyer was removed. After finishing the system adjustments, the engineer respectfully asked me, "CEO Tang, would you like to retain emergency authorization for the former mistress of the house?" I looked at the brand new master control panel and answered calmly, "No. From today onward, this place is no longer open to her." That night, I stood alone on the terrace. The wind was still just as strong as before. The sea of light still stretched below. The wine glass was still there too. Only the people had changed. I lowered my head and looked at the newly registered sole master authorization in my palm. Suddenly remembering the first day she moved in, she had wrapped her arms around my neck and smiled, saying that from now on, this place would be our home. Back then, I believed her, and I truly gave her the key. Too bad she was the first to open the door for someone else.